Hey there, everybody. Pete Pardo here from Sea Tranquility. Welcome to another edition of Worst to Best Albums, where I take a look at a discography of a band that I dig. In most cases, I dig quite a bit, and I run through my least favorite album or their worst album all the way to my favorite or their best album. Again, these are just my opinions, my outlook, my take on the discography from these bands. This is not some kind of definitive, these are the best albums or the worst albums in their catalog, because chances are some of you probably love the albums that are not my favorites and vice versa, right? So it's all subjective, right? It's all based on what we like, what clicks with us the most. So I'm going to talk today about a band that I love a lot. It's one of my favorite bands of all time, Black Sabbath. You know, I love much of their discography. There's a couple albums towards the end that I'm not quite crazy about, but I don't hate any of their albums. Probably the bottom two I'm not a big fan of. I rarely listen to anymore. I've heard them in tons of times, but the rest of them, kind of hard to rank them. So the way I have them ranked today, if you were to ask me a month from now, might be a little different. If you don't agree with my rankings, that's quite all right. Again, it's all based on our opinions, right? So rather than, start arguing with me about the way I have them ranked, just let everybody know how you rank them, right? It's really all that matters, because we all like what we like, all right? We all hear these albums differently. So again, these are just my picks. This is not the definitive guide to the best to worst or worst to best albums of Black Sabbath. It's just kind of how I sort of rank them. But, any of these could flip-flop. Like I said, if you were to ask me a month from now, I'd probably have some of these in a different order, depending on which ones I'm listening to, what I'm grooving to at the time. But for today, this is kind of the way I want to go with it. So starting at the bottom, all right, my least favorite, or in my opinion, the worst Black Sabbath album ever created, released, is Forbidden. It's bad news when you got like a couple of rappers appearing on a classic hard rock, heavy metal legends albums, and that was not a good idea here. I don't like the production of this album. I'm not crazy about the songs either. There's a couple tunes that are pretty good. You got Cozy Powell on here, and, Bob Daisley and Iommi and Tony Martin, but it just doesn't really work for me. Like I said, I'm not crazy about some of the songs. I'm not crazy about the production. This should get rid of the rappers. This should have been, a pretty decent album. As it is, not very good. Just didn't work for me. Next up, at the bottom of the barrel for me, I know there's a lot of you out there that love this album, and that's cool. Chris Allo and I took a lot of flack from some of you for naming this our least favorite, or one of our least favorite Sabbath albums of all time. And I'm sorry, I've had this for 40 years or close to 40 years. I'm just not a big fan of Never Say Die. This for me was Sabbath on the last rungs before they were ready to completely implode. I don't like the production on the album. The songs are kind of lightweight. They're not really Sabbathy. I know they were experimenting with a lot of other stuff, but to me they sound bored, not really, knowing what the hell they should be doing at that point in time. Ozzy sounds disinterested. Other than, granted, there's a couple of good tunes on here. Never Say Die is a great song. Johnny Blade is fun. Junior's Eyes is okay. Hard Road is okay. Yeah, Shockwave's kind of interesting. The rest of it just really doesn't do a hell of a lot for me. And I love jazz music, but I don't want to hear jazz on a Sabbath album. Just don't. Cool cover art, though. But yeah, not a big fan. Cross Purposes comes in next. A decent enough album from the Tony Martin era. A fine singer who I thought fit quite well in with the band. Just unfortunately, this was at a time where I think that the general public was kind of losing interest in Sabbath, because you had all these other great metal bands coming up. And, the lineup was changing constantly, and people were like, God, if it's not going to be the Ozzy lineup of the band or the Dio lineup of the band, we don't know if we can accept whatever it is that Tony's bringing to the table here. But unfortunately, for the band, the public wasn't really grasping, and the general public wasn't really grasping on a lot of these really fine albums, because, this is a decent album. It's a good album. Tony Martin, a good singer. Wrote some cool lyrics. Good vocalist. Some good songs on here. Cross Purposes. Very solid. All right, coming in next, we're going to go with The Eternal Idol. Again, another very strong album from the Tony Martin era. Just because these are ranking down at the bottom of the list does not mean that I don't like these. It's just that you got to rank them, and I like a lot of these other ones better. But these are I dig these Tony Martin albums. Forbidden for me is the worst of the lot, but I think all the others are pretty damn strong. And if you're lucky enough to hear the recordings of these with, this album with Ray Gillen on vocals before he split the band, also very, very cool. Well-written album, some great songs on there. I dig it. Next up, I'm going to go with Tyr. Tyr. Oh, Anno Mundi's such a great tune. Lawmaker is awesome. What else? Valhalla. Some really strong songs on here. You got Tony, you got Cozy. Cozy Powell, when you really think about it, was a perfect fit for this band. Unfortunately, he kind of joined the band at a time where a lot of people really weren't listening. Tony Martin on vocals, Neil Murray on bass, Jeff Nichols on keyboards. That's a great lineup right there. That's a great lineup. Coming in next, then my favorite album from the Tony Martin era is Headless Cross. I dig this album a lot. Dig it a lot. A lot of great songs on here. I like the production on here. It's just a big sounding, epic heavy metal Black Sabbath album, I think. Easily has always been my favorite of the Tony Martin era. Dig it a lot. All right, next up, and this could come a little higher. It's my least favorite of the 3 Black Sabbath Dio albums, all right, but I still like it a lot. Dehumanizer. It's probably the heaviest album they ever did. This is just bone-crunching heavy. Got one of my favorite songs from the Dio-led era of the band, great song. I dig it. It's a really good album. Not quite as good as Mob Rules and Heaven and Hell, in my opinion, but I still like it quite a bit. I'm going to put, and again, this one, it's their most recent one, obviously, so it's kind of hard to rank it in amongst all these albums that myself have been listening to for 20, 30, 40 years, right? But I'm going to put 13 up next. This is like a love-hate with a lot of people. There's some longtime fans that don't like it because it's not very original. Some folks think it's just too doomy and dirgy. I like it. I think this is a really good album. I've listened to this a ton. It was one of my favorite albums of the year when it first came out. I still listen to it. I still dig it. I might even rank it higher than the next one at times because the next one's coming up is I really dig a lot, but it's hitting upon a period in the band where they were starting to wane a little bit, and that's Technical Ecstasy. It's what it is for me. There's just a handful of songs on here that are absolutely fantastic, and the rest of it for me I'm not that into. But Gypsy, All Moving Parts Stand Still, Dirty Women. Rock and Roll Doctor's kind of fun. Backstreet Kids is very good. The rest of it I'm kind of like, but those are really good songs. Again, this is for me. This and Never Say Die are Sabbath kind of clutching at straws, so to speak. I like it. Any given day, I might tell you that I like 13 better because for me it's a little fresher, it's heavier, but there's some really classic stuff on here. All right, next up, I'm a big fan of this album. Big fan of this album. It's just got some great songs. It's got Glenn Hughes on vocals, one of my favorite vocal performances by him. I know the band at the time was just a mess, and they got all these different players coming in. It wasn't really Sabbath, but it was put out as a Sabbath album. Okay, of course, 7 star. Black Sabbath featuring Tony Iommi. I'm a big fan of this album. Whether you consider it a Sabbath album or an Iommi solo album, doesn't really matter. It's got Black Sabbath on the front. It's a Sabbath album for me, and I love this album. Really great songs on here. Danger Zone, Angry Heart, Turn to Stone, In for the Kill, title track, Angry Heart. Dig it. It's melodic, it's heavy. It's got some killer vocals from Hughes, even though he was a complete disaster at the time, right? Oof. All right, next up, and again, this one could... I'm liking this album more. When I first started listening to Sabbath in the late 70s into the early 80s, this album was not one of my favorite of the original Ozzy ones. I liked it, but it's a really different album. It's very kind of progressive, and it's just a little out there. But as I've gotten older and I've really accepted a lot more progressive music and a lot weirder music, I've gone to appreciate this album a lot more. So this could potentially rise a little bit. But again, a lot of these albums kind of coming up and for the remainder of my list, I almost like equally. So it's like trying to pick your favorites among your kids or your pets or whatever. It's really hard. So don't get hung up on where these are sitting in my list because I love them all. And for the purposes of doing the show, I just had to rank them. But they're not separated by much because I know there's going to be people who's going to be like, oh my God, there's no way that Sabotage is worse than this album. And it's like, whatever. Just tell me what your order is. Don't worry about what order I'm ranking them in. It doesn't matter. Sabotage, coming in next. There are some absolute bruisers on this album. Hole in the Sky. Any album that has Hole in the Sky and Symptom of the Universe, right? On the same album. Can't beat that. Megalomania. Don't Start Too Late. Just, man, the whole lot is just a weird but great album. Right? Awesome stuff. Probably Sabbath at the height of their kind of experimenting with a lot of different ideas. Okay. Next up, Mob Rules. The sophomore record with Mr. Dio and the debut of Vinny Appice on drums. I know there's a lot of folks who, absolutely love the Dio years but prefer this over Heaven and Hell. It's pretty close. But well, as you can see, I haven't talked about Heaven and Hell yet, so that's obviously coming. But I love this album. Love this album. I saw them on this tour. It was one of my favorite shows I've ever seen in my life. And, title track, Sign of the Southern Cross, Country Girl, Turn Up the Night. Come on. So many great songs on there. All right, next up. Obviously, for all of you who have been watching this show for all these years, my two favorite bands of all time are Deep Purple and Black Sabbath, right? So how could I not rank Born Again pretty damn high on my list? I love this album. I love this album when it came out. I love this album today. I listen to this a lot, and I've been listening to this for how many years now? Going on 40 soon in a couple of years. It's one of my favorite vocal performances from Ian Gillan. He is shrieking and screaming up a storm throughout this entire thing. They sound like they're having a blast. The album is heavy and dark and muddy. Yeah, the final mix is kind of not the best because the whole album's got this kind of like muddiness to it. But the songs are fucking great. Okay? I mean, Jesus. Disturbing the Priest, the title track with Ian just... it's like Sabbath's version of Child in Time with Ian screaming up a storm. Zero the Hero, Trashed, Digital Bitch for crying out loud. Hotline. Ow! Take me on the hotline. Yeah! I mean, it's just, I remember seeing them live on this tour and I was just like, I was in my glory. I was drunk as a skunk and loving it. Loving it. Ugh. Yeah, say what you want about the album cover art, right? It's iconic for me. I've told this story before, but I remember going to see this show and coming home, bought a shirt, right? Coming home and the next morning getting up to go to school and I'm wearing my Born Again shirt and my mother looks at me, she goes, what are you wearing and where did you get that? I'm like, I went to the show last night, Ma. She goes, you're not wearing that to school, are you? I'm like, hell yeah, I am. Hated it. She hated it. That shirt eventually disintegrated from overuse and I had to rebuy that again in recent years. So I have a Born Again shirt. Right, I had to buy that again. It's just so obnoxiously cool, right? Coming in next, I'm going to go with the debut. It's legendary for a reason. I love it. Again, all these ones that are kind of coming up, I love almost equally. It's hard to put them in a ranking. Love that cover art. It's so hauntingly, or cover photography, I should say. It's so haunting, so creepy. Just, it's iconic. You got some classic tunes on here. I mean, this album, Paranoid, I've listened to death in my life. So I don't listen to either one of them too often anymore because they're just staples that you don't, it's almost like you don't need to hear them anymore because they're ingrained in your head, right? But the title track and NIB and The Wizard and all the jamming and all that kind of stuff, a great album, a landmark debut album for a reason. Going with Paranoid next. Again, if you would have asked me this in 1980, I would have told you different, because this, in 1978 or 9 is when I first heard this album. I think it was 79. First time I ever heard this album, and that really basically changed my life forever. It was the first Sabbath album I ever heard. At the time, the heaviest thing I was listening to was Kiss. I heard this album, and I was like, whoa, what in the world is that? I love it. And that was it for me. And here we are. But, I've listened to this hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times that, again, it's one of those albums that I don't really need to hear often. Once every couple of years I put it on, I'm like, I can groove to Hand of Doom and Electric Funeral, and I still like Fairies Wear Boots a lot. I don't ever need to hear Paranoid again. Probably don't ever need to hear Iron Man again. I still groove to War Pigs. I do. And Planet Caravan, it's kind of cool for what it is. I never was really a big fan of that tune, but I still enjoy War Pigs quite a bit. That's, it's played, but it's one of those kind of played out songs that I still enjoy. So yeah, there's no denying the importance of this, but I like other Sabbath albums better, including this one. It's got to be near the top for me. Heaven and Hell, man. Because, I remember getting into Paranoid. I started getting into Sabbath right as Ozzy's leaving the band. So I was like, what? No more Ozzy? And then this came out, like almost immediately after I started listening to Sabbath. And I was like, holy moly, this is great. Because again, I was into, at the time, a lot of getting into a lot of the faster types of metal. And this is completely different than this. There's no similarities there at all. And I loved Ronnie's vocals, of course, with Rainbow prior. And I still love this album. The title track alone kills me. Die Young is amazing. Neon Nights, Children of the Sea. So many great songs on here. Lady Evil, Lonely is the Word. Just amazing. Love the cover art. It's iconic. Absolutely love it. Ronnie, rest in peace, my friend. You were the best. Coming in next, and this one has kind of floated around. I think, when Chris Allo and I did our 3-part History of Black Sabbath shows last year, oh God, a year and a half ago, whenever that was. Can't keep track of the days and months and years anymore. At the very end of episode 3, we listed, I think, our 5 favorite Black Sabbath albums of all time. And I'm not 100% sure my top 5 here are exactly the same as what I said that day, because there's one album that's been kind of like really rising on the chart for me amongst all of their discography, and that's Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. This was along with Sabotage, this was one of those albums when I was younger, when I was first really getting into Sabbath, that there a lot of experimentation going on here, and I was gravitated towards those more straightforward, bruising, heavy albums, and this was again, a little weird, some different stuff going on there, really cool, but not one of my favorites. Well, here we are in 2020 and 54 years old, and I'm like, yeah, this is the real deal. There's some really great shit on here. Title track alone is amazing. A National Acrobat, amazing. Kill Yourself to Live, amazing. Spiral Architect, amazing. Just great stuff. Killer artwork. Love the production. Just a really odd and amazing and powerful album. My top 2 pretty much haven't changed for decades and decades and decades, and I'm really close to these 2 albums. Master Reality, number 2. All right. So straightforward, heavy, bruising. You call this the birth of Stoner Rock, I guess. Who knows? But man, when you got Sweet Leaf and After Forever and Into the Void and Lord of This World and Children of the Grave, it's dark, it's menacing, it's evil sounding. I love the kind of denseness of the production. I love the songs. They're just so heavy and massive and fat. Dig it. Master Reality, my number 2 favorite Sabbath album of all time. Of course, getting into number 1, I kind of gave it away as soon as I sat in this chair because I'm wearing the damn shirt, right? But Volume 4, yeah. I know there's a lot of people out there, like longtime Sabbath fans, who are not a big fan of this album. Because this was the album that came after this one. Again, straightforward, bashing, heavy. And then this, which had a lot of different styles and flavors on it, right? The first time the band started stretching out a little bit. This is kind of the beginning of their progressive phase, which really came to fruition on Sabbath Bloody Sabbath and Sabotage. But this, I think, retains a lot of the heavy early stuff, as well as a little bit of that experimentation. And there's songs on here that still to this day remain some of my favorite Sabbath songs. You know, Snowblind, Wheels of Confusion, Tomorrow's Dream, Supernaut. How about Under the Sun, for fuck's sake? Oh my God, such heavy, heavy stuff on here. Man. You know, Changes. It's a bit different too. Kind of an experiment there. Kind of a little atmospheric, moody pop song, right? I don't need to hear Changes ever again. But the rest of this album, St. Vitus Dance. I mean, it's great. Love it. Love it, love it, love it. Always have. It's my favorite Sabbath album. It's been my favorite Sabbath album for as long as I can remember. You know, sometimes in your life you gravitate towards certain records, certain albums, certain CDs, and they really click with you. And music affects everybody differently. So while this may be my favorite Sabbath album of all time, for some of you this may be your number 10 or your number 15 or whatever. Doesn't matter, right? All that matters is that you love Sabbath and you can appreciate their rich discography, as different as it all is. You got all these different eras. As you can see, I hold the early Ozzy era very near and dear to me. Most of those early albums, right? I love the Dio era. I have a lot of respect for the Tony Martin era, and I really dig those one-offs with Gillan and Glenn Hughes. From my love for Deep Purple, right? I thought that was a great match, both of those. So there you have it. Black Sabbath, worst to best. Least favorite to favorite, whatever the hell you want to call the show. That's where we got. So let's backtrack. So my number one, we're going to go one, my favorite to my least favorite. Volume 4, Master of Reality, Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, Heaven and Hell, Paranoid, Black Sabbath, Born Again, Mob Rules, Sabotage, 7 Star, Technical Ecstasy, 13, Dehumanizer, and again, those last couple could all flip-flop, whatever. Headless Cross, Tear, Eternal Idol, Cross Purposes, Never Say Die, and last but not least, Forbidden. There you have it. Black Sabbath, worst to best albums. This is on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, of course, we're here on YouTube all the damn time. I am Pete Pardo. Thanks for joining us on this Saturday. We had a bunch of programming going live today. You may or may not see me tomorrow. We'll see what tomorrow morning brings. I may want to bring you something, one little tidbit tomorrow. Then we got Martin Luther King Day off on Monday here in the U.S., so that's time to throw a couple things on as well. So you might see all sorts of other things from me, right? Might do another artist retrospective, right? Album cover art, might do some Rodney Matthews, might do a Hypnosis. We'll see. We'll kind of see where we're feeling, how much time I got. Coming up Tuesday, we've got a very cool rant scheduled with the Seibert brothers. I'm not going to divulge what it is. Next weekend, ton of stuff happening. We got Chris Allo and Butch Jones coming into the studio. All sorts of shows, top 10 songs, best album openers, bunch of different things. Okay? Mike Antonelli and I getting together next weekend as well. Miles Davis, top albums by decade for all you jazz lovers in the house. All right? Going to start, once we get all that out of the way, I'm going to start working on the history of Italian progressive rock. All right? That's just the tip of the iceberg. So much stuff going to be happening. So much stuff. You don't want to miss any of it. So stay tuned. Make sure you subscribe. If you're just visiting us for the first time, all right, hit that subscribe button. Tell your friends. Don't just visit and go away. We've got a lot of stuff. If you like this video, we got tons more like this. We have a library of content. Go to our playlist going back 5+ years, 5.5 years worth of videos, hundreds, all sorts of great stuff. Go investigate the playlist. There's all sorts of great old content that'll keep you busy for weeks on end. All right. So we'll see you guys real soon. Take care. Bye-bye.